Hi, I'm Denise Smith, and I'm your host. You are watching Education in the Community, and I'm so happy to be with you today. If you have the deep determination to succeed, you will not fail. So continue to watch us today because we have a very interesting gentleman today. I am so happy to be able to interview an author, and we have a look from Dr. Jess Perry's life. He's a World War II veteran, an educator, a loving husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and one who believes in a beloved community. He wrote a book. It's called From a Northern Louisiana Village to a Northern California Village. A very good book that you would want to buy. Please, let me welcome my host today, Dr. Jess Perry.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you today. I'll tell you for a lot of different reasons. For the one reason is that you were my English teacher with the Leadership Institute of Allen Temple Baptist Church, and you were an excellent educator. I learned so much from you. But the most important thing today is I want to talk a little bit about your journey. So if I could just ask you a few questions about your book, I would be more than honored to be able to do that.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. What was the genesis of your book, and how did you get the title to organize it?
Well, of course, being from northern Louisiana, because the title of my book is From a Northern Louisiana Village to a Northern California Village, The Life and Times of Jesse Perry. Because those are the areas that really had a part of my life, I decided to entitle the book From a Northern Louisiana Village. And it came from my desire to leave a note or two for my children and grandchildren about their father and grandfather. I wanted them to have something to remember me by, besides the knowledge I had imparted to them when I was alive.
Wow. Well, you know, no one would ever guess your age. Is it okay if I tell your age? I got to get your approval first.
But of course, I'm okay now.
You're okay now? Okay. I know when you were 89, you said you would never tell your age, but now you're 92.
That's right.
And we're looking forward to 93.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be a great celebration. Yes, it is. What actually prompted you with a African country with your roots? Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay.
How was it founded?
I was always interested in my ancestral roots. My late sister, because I was the elder of 4 children, she wanted me to sort of research our ancestors in the States. And I started that, but then I became more interested in my African ancestry, especially after Alex Haley did his famous book, Roots. Oh. And I wanted to know from which country my ancestors came from, because he had a beautiful journey in researching his life story and the place from which his ancestors came. And that's what I wanted to do for myself and to pass on that knowledge to my children and grandchildren. So it was an interest that had played a part in my life for many years. And finally, at a certain age, I decided to go ahead and try to do that. And I did find out, I had my DNA test. Oh. I had at least 2 DNA tests made. One, of course, the first ones they do is for the matriarch of the family, okay, on my mother's side of the family. And it was determined that their ancestors, and of course mine, came from a small West African country called Guinea-Bissau. And after I got that information back, I decided to do it. I said, I wonder where did my dad's ancestors come from? And ironically enough, they came from the same country from which my mother's ancestors, Guinea-Bissau. And so I have my certification, and this was done through AfricanAncestry.com. There's an ancestry program on now, which is it's not African. And so the AfricanAncestry.com, this present program tells you from different countries from which you have some bloodlines. But I was interested in one single country, and that's what I received when I got the information that my folks came from Guinea-Bissau
Wow.
in West Africa. It's a francophone country. They speak French.
Oh, really?
There now, of course, because it was colonized by the French at one time.
Really?
Yes.
Well, also, you were in the Army.
Oh,
Tell
yeah.
me, what rank did you hold?
Well, at first, of course, when one is drafted, one is a private.
Okay.
And I was a private in the Army for about a year and a half. And later on, I became a staff sergeant. I was discharged as a staff sergeant. I was what was called a battalion operations sergeant. I was in battalion headquarters.
Ooh, that sounds impressive.
But I want to tell you a little bit about my first, if it's okay.
Of course.
About my first experience as a private.
Would this be your most memorable?
This would be my most memorable experience. Not really. That may be the
One of
first,
them?
but not. There's another one.
Okay.
And this has to do with when I was a private, and I was assigned to a trucking company because most African American soldiers during World War II were assigned to service companies, although there was a tank company and there was a 99th Pursuit Squadron, but most of us were in service companies. And we were engineers building pontoon bridges or driving trucks and delivering supplies and this sort of thing. And so I was in a trucking company, assigned to a trucking company, and I was told one day to go out and check the dipstick. I said, what's the dipstick? I didn't even know, because I didn't know how to drive.
Oh.
My folks didn't own a car. And so I said, what in the dick is this, a dipstick? I finally learned later on what a dipstick was.
Oh my God.
But so my company commander said, well, maybe we'd better find another job for you, because I could type 45 words per minute. And I was assigned as the company clerk, where I issued uniforms and supplies to the rest of the guys in my company. But the second what I think is the most important memory I have from my experiences in the Army, that I fought in the Battle of the Bulge, which was a famous battle where the Germans were trying to break through at a small village in Belgium. And I was still in the trucking company, but I wasn't driving. There was a driver, but I was accompanying him with a truckload of gasoline, 5-gallon cans of gasoline. They called them jerry cans. And as we drove into this area, bombs were falling all around. We could have been blown to smithereens.
Wow.
But I said it was because of the prayers of my mother, Caroline Perry.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And who prayed me home safely.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was the second memorable experience of my Army life.
That is amazing. To be who you are, we know that it is really by the grace of God that you are still here, still look good. You would never know ever how old you are. It's surprising.
Boy. You're making my day.
It's the truth, though. It's the truth. And to be so special and to be the awesome man that you are, you're a humble man. What were your parents like? Because they must have been awesome too.
Oh, I had wonderful parents. I'm sure each one of us would say that. I had a wonderful mother and father.
Wow.
They were both functional illiterates.
Really?
My father only went to school one day in his life.
What?
He told his mother when he came home from the first day that there was a snake in the road. And she said she wasn't going to send her son back to be bitten by a snake.
Okay.
My mother graduated 6th grade and was being promoted to the 7th grade, but she had to quit school because her mother passed away. But my mother never split at infinity. They called her the proper lady. She spoke proper English. And they were both wonderful people. I think about them every day. They've left us 42 years ago.
Wow.
And I think about those two people and how my father, who worked as a shoe shine man in this little small town, they didn't call him a man, they called him a boy.
Wow. Because back then, that's what they would.
Of course. And he was making $5 per week, would you believe?
Wow.
How did he do that for a wife, 4 children, and his mother who lived with us. I don't know how the man did it, but
So you had 3 siblings?
Huh?
You had 3
I
siblings?
had 3 siblings. Yes, I had 2
Wow.
brothers and a sister. Right.
Wow. Wow, it's amazing. And tell me,
And they've all preceded me. I was the firstborn, and they have all gone in.
wow.
Yes.
So there's a plan for your life. And the fact that you wrote this book and you're here to talk about it is just, there's a plan, there's a purpose.
Yeah, my wife tells me though, God is keeping me here to take care of her.
Oh, good. And she's a beautiful woman.
Oh, thank
so
you.
you appreciate beauty because she's a beautiful woman.
Yes.
She is a educated woman, and she's a loving woman.
Yes, she is.
You know,
She's sweet.
and you've been married
65 years.
That's a blessing in itself.
In itself.
Some people don't live 65 years.
That's right.
And you married 65 years.
That's right.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Wow. You know, what was your education like in your life?
I had my education in Louisiana was rather decent because we didn't have a lot of the materials that the white students had. We had to use their books. We didn't have new books to use. After the white kids had used their books, they passed them down to us. But we had beautiful, dedicated teachers who were very much interested in us. And one in particular, my English teacher, her name was Dorothy Simpson, a beautiful woman. And when we moved from Winfield, Louisiana to Weed, that's the northern Louisiana village.
Oh, really?
My father worked in the lumber mills in Weed, because up there is a lumber near Oregon. That's all sort of lumber up there. And I was in class one day in this integrated school, and the teacher called on the class what we were going to do was doing declination of verbs, you know. And I knew the answer. She never called on me. So I stood up on a chair. She still didn't call on me.
What?
And I said, that's all right, because my African-American teacher in Louisiana had taught me well. She knew verbs and she knew everything else about American literature and English.
Wow.
So, but she never called on me, and that really stuck with me for quite a while.
Really? Do you know that I've known a teacher a long time, and she used to tell me that the children that were like cutting up so badly that was cut up in the classroom, she said how she got back at those children is that when they would raise their hand, she wouldn't call on them. And she said that they wanted so much attention, that's why they were such cut-ups. But you were just a smart young man.
Well,
that's all it was.
At least I knew the answer to the question, and I was not called upon.
Wow.
And speaking about education, I don't know what other question you're going to ask about that, but I was graduated from Fresno State in 1952, the same year that my wife and I were married.
Nice.
And I was the first African American to be awarded a degree in journalism from Fresno State.
Really?
And the chair of the journalism department had set up interviews from all of the other kids in the class who were white, and for those small newspapers down there in the San Joaquin Valley. So he came to me and he says, now, Mr. Perry, what are your plans? I said, that's okay, I have plans. At that time, I was selling the Sun Reporter newspaper.
Oh, really?
In Fresno, and I wrote a column called the Fresno Newsgram. And so Carlton Goodlett, who was the owner of that paper, hired me. So when I left Fresno, I moved up to the Bay Area and took the job in the city with the Sun Reporter. So I told him, that's okay, I already have a job.
See there? See there? The plan was already made.
It was already laid out.
That's it. That's it. That's wonderful. What made you want to become a teacher?
Well, I really didn't want to teach.
You didn't?
No. That's
but you were such a good teacher.
To journalism, because most of my relatives back south were teachers. And I said, I'd like to do something different. But one day I was reading the Oakland Tribune, and there was an article asking for people who had a degree, and a teachable degree, and journalism, one could teach journalism. So I signed up for this program. It was sponsored by the Ford Foundation.
Oh, okay.
And there were 45 people who applied for the fellowship. I was one of 25 who was accepted at San Francisco State to earn my teaching credential. So that's when I became a teacher. I did my student teaching at Luther Burbank Junior High School in the city, and then at Mission High School in the city.
Really?
And I was offered a job then in Oakland. I was offered 2 jobs, one at a junior high school and one at a high school. But in my practice teaching at Luther Burbank, which was an 8th grade class, the children were sharpening pencils, they were passing notes. I said, I don't think I can deal with this.
That was one of the challenging schools in San Francisco.
So I said, I prefer to teach at a secondary high school. And so I was hired to teach at Castlemont. I became the first African-American male to teach English at the high school level in Oakland in 1959.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. That's absolutely amazing. You know, why did your family leave Louisiana?
Well, there were several reasons why we left. The one stark one was I started working when I was 11 years old. And I was washing dishes at a restaurant, at a cafe called the American Cafe, would you believe? And one day I asked my mom and dad, it was on a Saturday, if I could go to the movies after I got off from work. And they said, sure, son, just make certain you get home before dark. And as I walked home down the street, there were 2 white boys who were college students. They were attending LSU, sitting in front of their father's pharmacy. They attacked me. I was about 14. And I was bloodied, my face and nose. And I ran across the street to the restaurant where I had worked. And so the owner asked me, Jesse, why did you come through the front door? Now, I had gone out that front door to sweep the steps off during the day, but she didn't want me coming, so I ran through the front door and in the kitchen, back to the kitchen. And so the next day, my mother, who was a sweet woman, she was walking downtown to check with these boys or the father at any rate, and my aunt, who worked for a well-to-do white family, saw my mother walking. She said, I said, Caroline, where are you going walking so fast? She says, I'm going to be hanged today. So they had attacked her firstborn child, and so she talked her out going down, and so that's when my father said, I better get you, Caroline, and Jesse Jr. out of this place. You're going to get us all killed. And so that was one of the reasons why we came.
And so you left Louisiana because of that?
And of course, World War II in 41, the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
Oh, okay.
And I had an uncle and an aunt, my mother's oldest sister, were already living in Weed. They had moved there in 1935. And so they finally talked my father and mother to, my mother would have come, but my father was a little reluctant to make the move at first.
Oh, really?
So he finally decided to bring us to California.
Okay, so it was all fine. It took a minute for him to agree.
To think about it.
Okay, but he did.
He did.
Well, good. That's wonderful. You know, you think about that kind of stuff, it just makes me want to cry, because you think with racism that was like that back then, and we see it still here now.
Oh, but of course.
You know, it just makes me want to cry. It's just very sad. It really is sad that we still have to live under these times.
Of course,
you know?
these constraints and these. My mother and father never taught us. She said, we're not teaching you to hate anybody.
Right.
You love everybody because they're all God's children.
Amen. That's right.
And one incident there, I don't know, in those days, men used to come by. They called them hobos.
Right.
They didn't call them homeless. And my mother would make a lunch for them. And I was home one day with her, and I wanted to go out to play with my friends. She said, well, Jesse Jr., you stay with me. I didn't connect it, you know, that she wanted me to be there because not knowing what this fellow might have done. But she said, I'm not turning away anybody. This may be Jesus coming to my house. And my father would be so upset with my mother. He said, girl, you better stop that. But she says, no, if they come by, if they're hungry, I'm going to feed them.
That's why you have such a loving heart.
Yeah.
That's why you have a humble spirit, a loving spirit, because of your mom and your dad. That's
Yes.
really a blessing.
Yeah,
That's a
two
blessing.
wonderful people.
Yes. What did you do immediately following your retirement to education? From education.
From my retirement from education, I retired from the San Diego City Schools. I was in charge of English language arts for the district, K through 12. I retired in '91, and shortly after I retired, I was elected to the presidency of the National Council of Teachers of English, the 85-year-old organization of English teachers in this country that had 2 African-American presidents in its 85th 5-year history. And I became the 3rd one, the first male.
Wow.
And we stayed in San Diego 3 additional years after I retired because they had bought me a fax machine and telephone line and all that kind of thing set up. So we decided to stay there. And in '94, we moved back to the Bay Area. My wife told me when I took the job there, she says, well, whenever you retire, we're going back to Hayward.
Oh, she had a plan.
Yeah, she had a plan. I said, well, of
okay.
course, love. And after I retired and we moved back here, I was traveling in South Africa. And I had traveled, Eisenhower started the People to People program. And this is for Americans become accustomed to the culture of the other countries. And this was not only for teachers, for doctors, lawyers, but anyway, it was an educator. And I had taken a group of teachers to New Zealand and Australia. And while I was there, I was elected president of the International Federation for the Teaching of English in Adelaide, Australia.
Wow.
And of course, there were only 5 countries that belonged to that group. Most of them were colonial countries, but Barbados was one of the 5 because it was, their educational system was based on the British system.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, and so that's, I had 2 presidencies after I retired. And subsequently to that retirement, I became secretary, I don't know if that question is there now, of the California Retired Teachers Association.
Oh, okay.
And I served in that, I was elected to that job, and I served for 4 years, and I retired from that job last year.
Just last year? Wow. What made you retire?
Well, it only ended. I mean, I could have run again, but I was fed up with it.
You're tired, you said that's enough?
I'd given 4 years of my life to that.
I understand.
So all we do was sit around and chat and talk and discuss, and I got bored.
And did you meet in different areas?
Well, we met in the north and in the south, Northern California and Southern California for our meetings.
Oh, that's nice.
Right, but then we were fighting for our pension, to make certain that retirement would be intact, because Schwarzenegger had borrowed several billions of it, and he finally paid it back. Right.
Thank God. Well, I've attended Allen Temple Baptist Church for over 34 years, and that's where I met you, and I don't even remember not knowing you and your beautiful wife. I don't even remember not knowing you, but what was the real important role that you've played at Allen Temple Baptist Church? You've done so many things.
Right. Well, my wife and I joined Allen Temple in 1967. We had been members of McGee Avenue in Berkeley. And by the way, Pastor E. Emeritus, our Pastor Smith Emeritus, and his family were also members of McGee Avenue. And my sister and her husband joined Allen Temple a year before and they said, well, why don't you stop commuting and join it? But I didn't want to stop coming to McGee over here.
Of course, yeah. When you have a church home.
Yes. But in 1967, we joined Allen Temple. And while there, I became superintendent of the Sunday Church School and chair of the Board of Christian Education.
Yes.
And shortly after, that was when Reverend Bailey was the pastor before Pastor E became the minister.
Right.
And when Pastor Smith came, and with his brilliant idea of starting a training program for prospective leaders, Sunday school teachers and ministers and so forth, he asked, I was on the planning committee, and then he asked me to become the dean of the school of the Leadership Institute.
Yes.
And I said, I thought this required a minister. He said, no, not really. He said, you're an educator, so
Yes.
you know how to organize curriculum. And
That's
so
right.
that's what I did. And I served as dean of the Leadership Institute for 8 years, and I taught for an additional 3 years. And I also taught while I was dean. I taught
Yes,
you.
that's right. I was the
in
first
my reading,
class.
writing, and thinking
That's
class.
right. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So that's what I did at Allen Temple. I had a wonderful experience at that congregation because our minister, forward-looking, Pastor E. And I know when we were living in San Diego, we believed in tithing.
Yes.
And we joined a church down south, and we would put part of our tithe in the church down there and send part of our tithe to Allen Temple.
You might want to talk about tithing. I don't think anyone that watches may not even understand what tithing is about.
Well, tithing, of course, is the 10% that we've been asked as Christians
Yes.
to contribute, to give up to the work of the church. And the 90%, of course, we keep.
Yes.
And because that is biblical,
Yes.
that we should tithe
Yes.
and give a portion, 10% of our earnings, whatever they are, to the ongoing work of the congregation.
Yes.
And so both my wife and I tithe. We're both retirees, but God is blessing us, and so we want fixed income, as we say.
Wow.
But we both tithe.
Yes. Well, you know, I find that the most tithers, or the reason why our church has been around for 98 years, is because of the faithfulness of people like you and the ancestors and the people that didn't even get to walk into the new church that was built.
Of course.
But that whole premise is that the fact that the elders are so committed to the future of people.
Right. And I tithe because even I said, when I retired, I said, now how am I going to make it, blah, blah, blah. But I'm always walking around with some few dollars in my wallet.
and you know, he makes a way out of no way, doesn't
That's
he?
right.
Yes.
And so I tithe, and I said, I know if I'm going to do this, things are going to be okay.
Yes.
Right. And they are.
And they are.
Yes.
Yes, and they have been.
And they have been.
And you're a shining light. You really are. You just really, I just feel just so blessed just to be able to interview you, just to be able to have the time with you, and just the fact that I know you and your family, you have a beautiful family, just a wonderful family. You've left I think the legacy, you're a living legend. That is what you are.
Oh, well, thank you. A young woman interviewed me for an article for the Oakland Post.
Yes.
And she said the same thing. It has never been published in the printed page, but it was online, and I was happy because I wanted it in the printed page because I wanted to send copies to my son who lives in San Diego, and a couple of my son who lives in Fremont and so forth. But it's okay.
It's a blessing.
Yes.
No, it's a blessing. Can I just thank you again for just being with me and just agreeing for me to interview you today?
Oh, but it's been my pleasure.
It's been a blessing for me.
Deacon Smith, and I'm going to recognize you because you're one of our deacons at Allen Temple.
Thank you so very much.
Yes.
I know that you've enjoyed Dr. Perry today. He has been a blessing. So I hope that you enjoyed the show. I hope you get a lot of good information from it. And just remember, if you have the deep determination to succeed, you will not fail. Continue to dare to dream with me, Denise Smith, your host. I'll see you next time. Thank you again.